Hey dorks. In 1984, Apple unveiled the first Macintosh, an all-in-one computer monitor combo with a monochrome screen and a graphical user interface unlike anything seen on the consumer market before. It was marketed as the computer for the rest of us and geared towards creative pursuits. The first model had 128 kilobytes of RAM, which was actually pretty standard for a computer of the time. But with the operating system being more computationally demanding than its contemporaries like the IBM PC Junior and the Tandy 1000, 128K just wasn't enough. They quickly released a model with more memory, the Macintosh 512K, later in 1984. Apple followed up with the Macintosh Plus in 1986, that was a further evolution of the compact Mac. I've done a video on the Plus already, so if you're interested in checking it out, I've put a link in the description. Up to this point, Apple had only made compact all-in-one Macintosh computers available, but that all changed in 1987 with the release of the Macintosh 2. This was called the Open Mac because it was the first Macintosh available with expansion slots. It was a desktop computer without a built-in monitor, so you had to supply your own. At the same event, the Macintosh SE was also unveiled, which was a new all-in-one compact, but this time with an expansion slot of its own, and the same 9-inch monochrome screen of the previous compacts. We wouldn't see another new compact Mac until 1989 with the SE30. This machine still had the 9-inch monochrome screen, but it was a huge leap in power for the compact Mac line, finally replacing the aging 8 MHz 68000 CPU with the 16 MHz 68030. The maximum amount of RAM you could equip an SE30 with was an unheard of 128 megabytes. But this was an extremely unrealistic proposition in 1989, because as far as I can tell, 16 meg sims were completely unavailable at that point. 1990 would mark the first time a new Mac could be purchased for under $1,000, and by under, I mean literally a cent. The Macintosh Classic was priced at $999.99. It was the newest compact Mac and was a real step back from the SE30. It was basically a cost-reduced SE without the expansion slot, and it used the same old 8 MHz 68000 as the previous compact Macs aside from the SE30, and it still had the small monochrome display. About a year later, the Classic 2 was released as the successor to the SE30. It had a 16 MHz 68030 CPU just like the machine it replaced, but it lost the PDS expansion slot and replaced it with a less flexible FPU slot. It also only allowed a maximum of 10 megs of RAM, a paltry sum when compared to the SE30's 128 meg maximum, and even in 1991 it was still sporting that same 9-inch monochrome screen. The following February, Apple unveiled a new compact Mac at the price of $1,400. It contained very similar specs to the Classic 2, like the 16 MHz 68030 CPU and the 10 meg RAM limitation, but it was finally the first compact Mac to ditch the 9-inch monochrome screen and replace it with a 10-inch Sony Trinitron color display. The new model featured a radical new case design when compared to all the previous compacts, including a logic board that connected with the rest of the computer through an edge connector instead of cables. The visual design of the case was also modernized with curves and swoops and a microphone built in right above the display. There was a much higher reliance on plastic than in previous models, with nearly all structural parts of the case being plastic instead of metal. At the time of manufacture, this was great because it allowed for less expensive construction and an overall lighter machine, but as we know now 32 years later, plastic was not great for longevity. Most color classics hold up well, but there are many machines of this era that are disintegrating into piles of plastic shards from the inside out. Along with the new visual design, the logic board also contains an expansion slot that's compatible with cards designed for the Macintosh LC line. An Apple IIe compatibility card will work great in here. I have a network card in mine. At the time, the Mac press had trouble figuring out who this machine was actually for. It seemed too limited for professional use and too small for home use. The price, $1,400, was only a little bit less than an LC3 with a monitor. My Color Classic came to me in a non-working state. From having a look at the board, I can tell that the capacitors have leaked and left a bunch of gunk on the board, so it's time to get out the pliers and yank them off before giving the board a clean. Now that the caps are off, we can take a closer look at the board and see that they've left a lot of goo to clean up. This is the CUDA chip, a glue logic chip that's essential for operation of the machine, and you're not going to easily find a modern replacement, although efforts are underway to change that. If cleaning this thing up doesn't work, we're dead in the water. I'll go ahead and clean it and reflow the solder joints and see if that gets us where we need to be. It's important to thoroughly clean up around where the caps were, not only to get rid of the goo they leaked, but also to make sure the pads are nice and ready for the new caps we're going to replace them with. Time to see if our traces are okay. Some of them near the CUDA chip look suspect. All of them are toning out fine except for this one. Looks like it's broken on both sides of this via that was directly underneath the worst looking capacitor leak. First I'll have to scrape away some solder mask to expose some copper to solder to. Now I'm going to put a tiny piece of enameled wire going along the trace so it makes contact with both sides and what's left of the via. After checking with my multimeter, I now get continuity along the trace, and on the other side of the board through the via, so it's fixed. Let's make sure I left enough room to put the new cap down. Beautiful. Did that cap mess up my repair? Nope. Let's put on the rest. Let's fire it up and see if we've got a working machine. It's important to remember that these machines have a power switch on the back that turns on the internal power supply, but to turn the actual computer on, you've got to have a keyboard hooked up and press the power on key. Look at that, it works. Let's do some finishing touches. I like to take these battery holders off and put on my own CR2032 battery holders instead. These batteries are much less likely to catastrophically leak. Apple also soldered on an FPU socket, so I'm going to throw a 68882 chip in here, along with two 4 meg SIMs to max out the RAM. Floppy drives are getting pretty unreliable these days and can take a lot of work to get going. Disks are also getting harder to come by, so what I like to do is use a floppy MU. Most of the compact Mac machines have an external floppy port, but unfortunately the Color Classic doesn't have one, so I'm going to have to improvise. There is an internal floppy drive cable in here that I can remove from the drive, but it's not nearly long enough, so I'm going to have to fashion an extension to be able to hook up my floppy MU. I put this together in a proto board and it works, but it's a bit janky, so I went into KiCad and designed a little PCB for it instead. It's super easy to take files from KiCad and export them as a Gerber file and send them out to PCB Way for manufacture. Not only will they take your designs and bring them to life on a PCB, they also have a turnkey assembly service where they actually look at your bill of materials and pick the best parts for the job. You just upload your Gerber file, bill of materials, and position file to their website, pick your options, and they do the rest. If you're not satisfied with the parts they pick, you can supply your own. In only a few days, I went from an idea to a fully working part thanks to PCB Way. They also provide several other services other than just PCBs, like 3D printing, CNC machining, and sheet metal fabrication. They've helped me bring many of my prototypes to life, as well as providing services for quickly spinning up a batch of open source hardware boards like the Blue SCSI I'm also putting in this machine. I highly recommend giving PCB Way a try. After getting System 7.1 installed from the floppy MU, it's time to explore what this machine can do. First up, some benchmarks and speedometer. Looks like it's about 3.5 times faster than a Mac Classic. That's to be expected. How's it compare to some of my favorite machines? For being a computer released in 1993, this is pretty underpowered. The 2CI walks all over it. The Quadra 650 even more so. But that's no surprise. This machine was much less expensive than those and targeted at a completely different market. Not sure what market exactly, but I do know it's become a collector's item nowadays. It's got a little QuickTime logo on here. Let's see how well it plays videos.
How the hell am I going to get out of this thing? Hey you! Let me out of this Color Classic!
He seems a little agitated. Let's try some games instead. Shuffle Puck Cafe runs great here. Let's try something a bit more demanding. SimCity 2000 might be too demanding. The resolution is very low, so it's hard to fit much on the screen, and it's so slow. It takes multiple seconds to change tools, draw roads, pipes, and power lines. It'd be painful to play this way. Let's see how Doom runs. Ouch. Maybe Wolfenstein 3D is more like it? Slightly better, but I wouldn't call it playable. How about Glypha 2? Now, this showcases some of the weirdness of this machine. It uses a weird resolution that's something between the original Compact Macs and 640 by 480, so nothing looks quite right. Lots of games and software of the era expected at least 640 by 480. Alright, now here's a game that runs well and really feels like it's in the spirit of the machine. So was the Color Classic crummy? Kind of? It was fairly inexpensive when it came out, but it was already a few years behind at that point. From a collector's standpoint, now it's a beautiful showpiece and pretty easy to work on, but it's a pain to actually do anything with. So crummy is in the eye of the beholder here. I love mine, even though it's not very good. Apple would follow it up with the Color Classic 2 later in the same year, but only made it available in Canada, Europe, and Japan, so they're very hard to get now. You can replace the logic board with one taken from an LC550 to turn it into a Stealth Classic 2, but that's not really my style. I'd rather keep the 550s intact and not orphan a 550 chassis and Color Classic logic board. For the upgrade-focused folks out there, you can also replace the logic board with one from a 575 to make the planned but never released Color Classic 3. Even more adventurous people can take boards from various PowerPC machines and with the help of a Dremel, make a PowerPC Color Classic. For me though, I'll just keep mine the way it is. It's cute, it's slow, it's crummy, but it's neat. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in watching me do more stupid stuff with computers, stay tuned.